Okay, cool. And let's begin. So let's start by doing our invocation chant. All right. Asato ma satgamaya. Asato ma satgamaya. Tamaso ma jyotirgamaya. Tamaso ma jyotirgamaya. Mrityorma amritam gamaya. Mrityorma amritam gamaya. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Okay, so the English translation, as always, is this invocation chant where we are invoking the divine so that it can lead us from untruth to truth, from darkness to light, and from death to immortality. And let there be peace for the next hour and a half at least, so that we can focus on this class and hopefully get deeper in our study and practice. All right, so last week was our first class, and we started our journey, you could say, into this work. And this book is essentially written to answer like the first question that comes to all of us, at some point in our life, which is, who am I? We go about this world and try to find happiness and fulfill our desires, but there comes upon a time when we start to ask the deep philosophical questions of who am I? What is this world? How does it come about? And this book is sort of starting with the most fundamental question, which is, who am I? And once I know who I am, I can then make an inquiry into what this world is. And we just started our journey about touching upon, what is the process of investigation. We started looking into the subject and object sort of discrimination, where we see that we are the subject and everything else is the object of perception. We started with our direct experience, which is by looking at the world through our first person viewpoint, and we see that I am here and then the world is outside. And we started by looking at the I and saying the I is the tool by which we see things. It is the subject from the perspective of the things that it is illumining, right? So the eye can illumine the color of the sky, it can illumine the color of the trees. So there is the subject and object relationship with the eye and all the objects that the eye reveals. Then we went a little bit subtler and said the eye itself is an object of perception to the mind, which means that the eye is revealing images and then the mind is forming thoughts about what is being revealed. So the eye can, see blue or rather reveal blue, it can reveal a color of a tree, but the mind is the one that's forming opinions on what is being revealed. So that you can have a thought that this is a tree. I can have a thought that the sky is cloudy. All of those are images that are being revealed, and the mind making opinions and adding, rather using memory to form thoughts and ideas about what is being perceived. So from that standpoint, the mind is illumining the objects of color and visual perception. And you can use that with like one sense, which is the eye, and you can apply that to all the senses, which is the nose, the ears, the touch. All of those are essentially objects of perception when it comes to the mind. So we're going to continue down this path. we're going to get more and more subtle into coming to a place where we can directly experience the self. And this is, we don't want to be too heady about this work. We are not trying to think about, what is the self? Is it, something like this? Is it something like that? Because the self is happening all the time. You are selfing right now. When I ask you the question, like, who sees the screen? You would say, I see the screen, right? Everyone would have that experience and say, I see the screen. That is yourself. There's no other self. It's not like you're going to have an experience and say, oh, this was, a super self that I just experienced. We are selfing all the time. Every moment the self is on. The problem is that there is no moment that the self is off. And so we cannot use our natural ways of learning to recognize what the self is. So what do we do? There's a problem, right? Like how do I recognize the self then? The way to recognize the self is by process of elimination. And this is a pretty, I would say, fundamental practice or a tool in this work. And the practice is neti, which translates to not this, not this. And what you do with that practice is you are looking at the world and you're eliminating everything that you are not. Everything. And it includes things in the physical realm. So, physical objects. It includes things in the mental realm. So thoughts, feelings, emotions. And you are looking at them and you're saying, I am not that, because I'm the one who's looking at it. So if I were to ask you, are you a cup? I have a glass here. Are you a glass? The mind is very clear about the fact that, yep, I am not a glass. I'm the one who is looking at the glass. So there is a subject-object relationship to me and the glass. So I'm clearly not the glass. But we never choose to analyze things which are closer to us. So when I look at my body, I have the same experience, that I am the one looking at my body. But we have just sort of assumed that I am the body. And similarly, if you go closer, which is more subtle, and go to the realm of thoughts and feelings, you can have a thought about what you ate for breakfast this morning. You can have a thought about where you went out last week. Those are also experiences which have a subject-object relationship. I can experience the thought that I ate Cambodian food last night. Right? That is an experience that I am illuminating. So the relationship there is also, I am the subject and the thought is the object. So I'm not my thoughts either. So what we do is we step by step eliminate things in our experience. And we get to a place where our attention is no longer on the stuff that is in our experience. So if I close my eyes, I can physically remove this world. And if I do that, what's going to happen is the mind is going to get active, and then the mental world of thoughts and feelings are going to get active. So now my attention is going to be on thoughts, feelings, and I will be going from one thought to another thought. But if I sort of stop paying attention to those thoughts and stop taking them so seriously, what's going to happen is over time, those thoughts are going to lose its deep mental energy. And then they will sort of come to the side, like they will not be as loud as they normally are. And between the space of thoughts, between when one thought starts and one thought ends, there is a gap. And if we can rest in that gap for some amount of time, you can start to see that there is a place which is beyond thought, which is beyond physicality. And if we can get a taste of that, our mind starts to shift and our mind starts to change. So that is the process that we're going to go through. We are going to slowly, step by step, eliminate parts of our experience, and not eliminate in the sense of destroy or, in a negative connotation, but more like we will go beyond. We will start to transcend parts of our experience. And we will get to a place which is only the self. So the only way to the mind has a lot of doubt about this work, which is, I don't quite believe that this is a thing. Like, I don't think it's possible. You can read how much ever you want, but there's always a part of the mind that is always going to have this doubt. And the only way to clear the doubt is to get to a point where the mind is completely silent. And that is the practice that we do to kind of train our mind or get our mind to a place where it can quieten down for some amount of time. And you only need it to be quiet for some amount of time. Because when the mind is quiet for some amount of time, something completely shifts. And after that point, there is no doubt, like the doubt completely disappears. And once the doubt is gone, the self is always on. Like, when are you not you? If I were to ask you, are you you? You would say, yes, I am me. How do you know that you are you? I just know. So the self is self-revealing. The word we use in Sanskrit is swayambhu. It is always self-revealing. It's always on. It doesn't need another light to really reveal itself. So the question of like, will I know or will I not know is a false question. It's like, when you experience it, you will know, and all doubt will go away. Okay, so that's where we are. Any thoughts or questions about this before we jump into the text? Okay. And of course, feel free to interrupt me at any time. Okay. So I want to start by acknowledging my teachers, who is a physical person, but there have been teachers which are part of the who are unmanifest as well. So prostrations to all the teachers of the past. Okay, so we finished verse 3, and now we're going to do verse 4. Kama sankalpa sandeho shraddha shraddhe dhiti tare hrim dhir bhirityevam adin bhasayatke kadhachitihi. So the English: consciousness illumines such other mental states as desire, determination, and doubt, faith and want of faith, steadiness, and its opposite, modesty, understanding, fear, and others, because consciousness is a unity. So here we're talking about the mind and all the different states that the mind goes through. The word for mind is manas. I think we covered that in the last. And the mind is essentially, the way we would define mind in yoga is, mind is equal to awareness of thought flow, which is, I have a bunch of thoughts that are happening and I'm aware of them. And when I'm in a state where the thoughts are clear, then my mind is peaceful. When my thoughts are, about fear, and it's about like something going wrong, my mind state is anxious. When my mind is like focused just on one thing, when I'm maybe working, you can say the mind is focused and clear and single pointed. So these are all sort of states of the mind. And then I can ask you a question: by what is all of these states revealed to you? And the answer to that is like the consciousness, the awareness that exists is the one that's illuminating all mind states, whether it is positive or negative. The sort of analogy that you can use is like the sun. The sun is one. The sun is shining and it's revealing all the things that exist on earth with the same light. There's no like multiple lights that's going into one place or the other place. So for example, I'm sitting in a room here and there's a window, and through the window the sun is shining through, and because of the light of the sun, it's illuminating all of the different things in the room. So there's a table here, there's a bookshelf there, there's a carpet. So there's all these different things that are in my room. If you look at your room, there's also possibly a window in your room, and the same light is coming through your window. your room is different because you have different stuff. You can say the equipment is different. So you have different furniture, you have different walls, you have different colors. So everything is different from your perspective. But the light that is illuminating your room is the same light that is illuminating my room. So Vedanta says that there is only one conscious being that's illuminating everything. It just so happens that there are windows through which it's peeping through, make it appear that it's different. So some small kid can have a false understanding that the light coming through my window is different from the light coming through your window. And they can be like, oh, it's a separate light. But the fact is that it is only one light. And this is a hypothesis. So I am presenting to you hypothesis number one, which is there is only one conscious being that exists. The consciousness in me is the consciousness in you. Now that's up to you to prove or disprove in your own direct experience. And this is something that you can put on the shelf for now if it's not something that is true for you. But this is what the scripture is saying, that there is only one consciousness. And in my experience right now, you can say, okay, but how do I know what the other person is experiencing? And yes, for now, we can put that on the shelf. But for our own experience, this verse is also saying that the same consciousness that illumines a state where I'm happy, or illumines a state that I'm miserable, or illumines a state that I'm sad, all of that is the same consciousness. So there is a unity that exists, that illumines all states. Does that make sense? Like, any thoughts about this? And we're going to go through like a process of, I will prove this to you, I think in the next verse. So let's go on. No deti nastameshyesha na vriddhim yati nakshayam swayam vibhatya thanyani bhasayet sadhanam vina. So this consciousness does neither rise nor set. It does not increase, nor does it suffer decay. Being self-luminous, it illumines everything else without any other aid. So here we're talking about the nature of consciousness. So this is a meditation verse, which is, so I did mention in the first class that this entire book is somebody's direct experiences. So these are essentially revelations, you can say, that somebody is having. They're experiencing their self in its glory, in its fullness, and they're writing about it. So this verse is essentially describing the nature of consciousness. And what is the nature of consciousness? It does not rise, it does not set. And the word for consciousness here that they've used is, I guess we will be introduced to this word. They haven't used it yet, but the word in Vedanta for consciousness that we use is Atman, which is the consciousness in me. And everybody has this subjective experience of consciousness, which is, and the word we use for that is Atman. So you will be seeing this word kind of thrown about quite often. And what is the nature of Atman? It does not rise, it does not set. It does not increase. So because it is infinite, you cannot add to it. It does not suffer decay because it is beyond time. So what is decay, if you think about it? So decay is something that is based on physicality, which is something is in the bounds of space or time. And, at point one, in time, it exists. And then over a period of time, it changes, it degrades, and eventually it suffers decay and it gets destroyed. So if something is within the realm of time, which is essentially being in the realm of physicality, it has to have properties of birth and death. Consciousness, on the other hand, is beyond birth and death. It never rises, it never sets, it never changes. So it is beyond change, you can say. And being self-luminous, which means that it has the property of awareness. It's not even such that it has a property of awareness. It is awareness itself. Because it is awareness itself, it illumines everything else. So let's go through a process right now. So let's sit comfortably and take a deep breath. So you can keep your eyes open for now. And if you're, taking a breath, and if you're looking around, let's say you're looking at the screen right now, you can clearly see that the screen is separate from me. I am the one who's looking at the screen. So now take a deeper breath. Just like how you're looking at the screen, you can now look at the breath. The breath is now an object of perception. My attentive faculty can now shift my attention on the breath. And just like how the screen was an object of perception, now the breath is an object of perception. So I can say, I'm not the screen. I'm the one looking at the screen. Now I can say, I'm not the breath. I'm the one looking at the breath. Let's go a little bit more subtle. Let's look at my body. I can feel my body. I can feel the sensations on my body. I can feel the sensations of maybe the chair that I'm sitting on. Just like the screen, just like the breath, I am aware of the sensations of the body. So I am not the sensations of the body either. I'm the one who's looking at the sensations of the body. Now let's go a little bit subtler. Think of your friend, your best friend. Just like how I'm looking at my breath, just like how I'm looking at the sensations of my body, I can look at the thought of my friend. I'm the one looking at the thought. So I'm not the thought either. I am illumining the thought. I'm illumining the image of my best friend. Now see if you can notice the space between thoughts. So I have a thought about my best friend. Maybe I have a thought about where they live. Notice if you can see when one thought ends and then the next thought begins. There is a small gap, a space, you can say. Just like how I'm illumining my body, the self is illuminating the space between the thoughts as well. So this self, this consciousness is shining and illumining whatever comes, be it a physical object, a subtle object, a thought. It does not change. Consciousness itself does not change. What is being illumined is changing. So we want to get to this place where I can step by step get closer and closer and closer to consciousness itself. Okay, so this is an exercise called subject-object discrimination, where I am clearly seeing that the object that is being revealed is not me. I am the one that's illumining the self, the object. So we want to use this process to kind of eliminate our sort of attention on the world and get to a place where the self reveals itself. And because it is self-revealing, the mind will have an experience of the self in its purity. And that's the place that we want to get to. And we will be using this meditation in our meditation as well. Any thoughts or questions about this? Okay. If not, let's do the next verse. Chichaya veshato buddhau bhanam dhistu dvidhastita ekaham kritaranyasya antakarana rupini. So buddhi appears to possess luminosity on account of the reflection of consciousness in it. Intelligence, buddhi, is of two kinds. One is designated egoity, the other as mind. All right. So here we are given a sort of definition, you could say, of what the mind and intellect is. So the word we use for intellect or intelligence is buddhi. And when the intellect has been awakened, buddhi becomes buddha. That is how we get the word buddha. So when your intelligence, or when your mind awakens to the reality that you are the self, you go from being a buddhi and you become a buddha. That's sort of the reason why we call enlightened beings Buddha. Okay, so one thing that is not, I guess we haven't discussed, is what is enlightenment itself? Like, why is it such a big deal? Like, why do people talk about it? And is it something that you gain? Is it something that you can possess? And the answer to that you will hear, like, a lot of people would say things like, everybody in the world is already enlightened. I don't know if anyone has ever heard something like that. Or and the reason is that enlightenment happens not to the self, because just like what we learned in the previous verse, the self is unchanging. It never rises, never falls, never sets. And we all are the self. Like, that's who we are. It's that the mind doesn't know that yet. So enlightenment is something that happens to the mind. It's not something that happens to the self. All that happens is that our mind is the one that is confused, or a mind is the one that's ignorant about our sort of real nature. We have never sort of thought to sit down and actually analyze and see, who am I really? Am I this collection of like physical things, like, my body is changing all the time. When I was younger, I was, had a tiny body, and I ate a lot of food, and over time, my body has become what it is right now. So essentially, the body is just a collection of food that I'm eating all the time. But we have never looked at that in this way and saying, oh, I never really thought about like, what is the body? And the same thing about the mind. So, in yoga, we say the mind and the body are just subtle and gross forms of physicality. And maybe it's worth going into what subtle and gross is. So in philosophy, we talk about gross and subtle. Gross is when something is a little bit more solidified, and subtle is when something is more, you can say, liquefied. So a good example is water. So if you take the element water, the subtle form of water is water vapor, because it is, it's not as tightly packed, right? Water vapor is, if you look at the chemistry of it, it is, got like fewer amounts of like molecules per volume. So water is grosser than water vapor, and then ice is grosser than water. So there's this sort of direction where you're going in something that is subtle to something that's gross and something that's grosser. So you can say ice is grosser than water, but water is subtler than ice. Similarly, water vapor is subtler than water. So that's sort of the analogy that we use, or the definitions that we use for subtle and gross. So in the case of the body, the physical body is gross, the mind is subtle. So if you think of all of our desires, they all appear in the mind first, right? So I want to eat a strawberry smoothie, right? That's a desire in my mind. First appears as a thought, and then I can maybe go down to my kitchen, open my fridge, get some strawberries, get all the ingredients that I need, and make that a physical reality. So you can say that the world is basically a grosser form of the subtle body of the world, which is like all of the minds that exist in this world. And we'll get to this in a different class. But essentially what I'm trying to get at is that the physical body is gross and the subtle body is the mind. And there's only one body. We have one body. And in the Western sort of understanding of body, we try to separate it. But in yoga, we say there is only one body. So you can act and try to heal the body in either the physical form or in the subtle form, but the effect is the same, which is why somatic work works, because by healing the physical body, you're actually healing the mind as well, and vice versa. If you heal the mind, automatically the physical body gets healed as well. So coming back to this verse, liberation, we were talking about what is enlightenment, right? So enlightenment happens to the mind. The mind changes, the mind loses its ignorance, it gets some new ideas, it fundamentally changes and transforms. And because of this transformation, the light of the self that's always on is recognized. Right now, we are in a place where we don't recognize this light because there's too much other stuff going on in our experience. And all we're trying to do with yoga and all of this meditation and practice is trying to get this mind controlled, you can say. Control is a bad word. I don't like the word control, but trying to assimilate it in a certain way that allows you to clearly see what the self is. It's trying to peep at the back. So, a good example is I have a torch and I'm shining the light of the torch at something. And the problem with the torch is that it can never see itself. It can always illumine things everywhere, but the torch can never see its own backside, because, you cannot use the light of the torch to shine it on itself. Yet it shines. So all we're trying to do with yoga is we are trying to remove the objects in our field of awareness, so that what is left is the light itself. And once the light is the only thing that's being illumined, then we can say, oh, this is the light in its full glory. Until that happens, there's always some other object in my perception and my attention goes to that and I miss the whole picture. So that's our problem, that the mind is too noisy and there's too many thoughts going on. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to quieten the mind for some amount of time. Okay, so coming back to this verse. So that's what enlightenment is. And that's what we're trying to do. And here we are trying to get an understanding of what is this mind and what is this, intelligence, and why does it keep me identified and believe in some ideas. So we're getting this breakdown of what intelligence is. So it's here, intelligence is of two kinds. We are saying that intelligence in this is essentially ahankriti, which is a word that we use, which is the integrating factor of my intelligence. So every morning when I wake up, I can say, yes, I have a bunch of memories that I am Puneet. I have this job. I have, I'm related to this person. These are all my friends. All of sort of the different facts that exist about myself, I can integrate it together. And the faculty that does that is this sort of ahankriti, which is this ego. And then the second aspect is the mind, which is, antakarana is the word we use for mind, which essentially translates to inner equipments. So, we have these sense organs, eyes, nose, ears, mouth, and touch, right? Like these 5 sense organs. These sense organs have physical aspects to it, but there's also a mental aspect to it. So you can say, oh, I have a physical sense organ, but actually the physical sense organ is not the one that actually gives us perception. It is the mental sense organ, which is actually the one that's revealing things to us. And I can prove this to you. So for example, have you ever had the experience where, you're reading a book or you're listening to some beautiful piece of music, or maybe you're like really focused and engaged in some activity, and somebody next to you is calling out your name and you just can't even hear them. And then they maybe tap you on your shoulder and you're like, oh, did you hear I was calling you for the last like 5 minutes? Did you hear? I'm like, oh, I was completely zoned out. Like I was focused on this thing. I didn't hear you at all. So what does that mean? It means that this ear was on. It's not like the ear goes off. The sounds were coming into the eardrum. It's just that the inner equipment, which is the inner ear of the mind, was not active because the mind was focused on, maybe you're reading a book, right? It was fully zoned into that. And because of that, information didn't kind of register, and you couldn't really respond to this person. So there is this inner equipments that exist, which is essentially revealing our experience. So, there's all of this information that's going on, but if my attention is not on it, I will not see it. That's basically how our experience is. That's a fact, right? Like, have you ever had the sort of, like you go to a place which is very visually stimulating, like maybe a busy market where there's like lots of things going on. You just may not even be able to notice what's going on because there's just too much activity. The mind is too scattered. But if you're in a place which is, maybe you're going into nature where there's, quiet, your mind seems clear and still. Why? Because the mind is no longer noisy. And because when the mind is no longer noisy, there is this sort of light of the self is revealed a little bit more. Which is why we feel great when we're in nature, when we go on a hike, when we maybe go out camping. Because the sort of noise of like the world is less. So buddhi is essentially this intelligence, you can say, or this intellect. I would say intelligence. I don't like the word intelligence here, but intellect is probably better. So buddhi itself, you can say, can become an object of perception. Like I can look at my mind and say, oh, it's pretty stupid today. I woke up, let's say somebody asks me to solve like a problem or something. I don't know, maybe, I don't know if you all been playing this game Wordle that's been pretty popular in the last 6 months or so, but it's like a word game where you guess letters and try to figure out what the word is. Sometimes I get it in 2 tries. You can only I think 7 tries, if I remember correctly. But sometimes you get it, I don't get the word. I'm like, oh, I'm an idiot today. But I can look at my mind and I can have an opinion about it, right? So my mind and my buddhi, you can say, or my intelligence and intellect itself is an object of perception. Do you see that? Some days I can be smart, some days I can be stupid, some days I can be super intelligent, some days my brain is not functioning, it's too clouded. So the brain and the mind itself are objects of perception. I hope you can try to see that and try to notice this, like on your day-to-day, when you're like engaging in the world. Sometimes when you're able to solve something immediately, you're like, wow, my mind was super sharp today. But then maybe one morning you didn't have your coffee and your mind was too clouded, and like brain didn't work, boom. So we can see that this is what's going on. The mind itself and the buddhi itself is an object of perception. Just like the furniture in the room. Like, you have different furnitures. One day you're in your living room, bunch of different furnitures, and some other day you're in your bedroom, completely different furniture. So just like that, you can see how the state of your mind is on different days. Any thoughts or questions about this?
Hey, Puneet, I have a question.
Yes.
So in the previous sloka, you mentioned that there's only one consciousness, right? And now we say that, just the previous sentence you mentioned, like, when my mind is stupid or my mind is, clear.
Mm-hmm.
When we say my or I, so
Mm-hmm.
are we all referring to the same consciousness? And how does my body differ from your body? If I is the same.
Yeah. So we don't want to, again, get too heady about this. Right now, in your own experience, you can say, what is the state of your mind? Maybe you're feeling sleepy. Maybe you're feeling tired. Maybe you're feeling very clear. You can see that right now. Is that not true, Prashant, for yourself?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
In the same way, you can currently see what your body is. My body is feeling, maybe I didn't get a good amount of sleep, so it's feeling a little tired. Maybe I slept very well. It's feeling great, very refreshed, energized. Maybe I worked out yesterday and now I'm feeling sore. So you're able to perceive that too.
Right.
Just like how you have those same perceptions about yourself, about your body or about your mind, I have the same perceptions too about my body and my mind. And those perceptions can be different. I can say, oh, yesterday I worked out and the trainer really kicked my ass and now my body is hurting. That may not be your experience because you have a different body, different equipments. So you have different, you can say a different mind, you have a different buddhi and intellect, you have a different physical body, you have a different subtle body, you have completely different physicality than I do.
Right.
And because of the different equipments, my experience of this world will be very different than your experience of this world. But the consciousness that illumines that experience is the same. Just like the light that illumines my room and the light that illumines your room is the same. So this is a hypothesis.
Okay.
Don't believe it. Please don't believe it. There's nothing to believe. Prove it for yourself or disprove it. That's all. It's either true or it is false, right? And try to prove that in your own experience.
Got it. Yeah, I see where you're going. Thanks.
Dan, you have a question?
Yeah, I want to add that I have an idea. If suppose my awareness and Prashant awareness are different, then there is some property should be different. But as per my understanding, my awareness and Puneet awareness or Prashant awareness, all anyone awareness are the same property. So,
yeah.
So for separation, we need some property. Okay, why we both are different?
Right, and you can say that the self actually has no characteristics. Everything that has a characteristics is physical. That is the problem with the self, is because it is the closest thing that exists. It is you, right? It's the closest thing. And the reason because it is so hard to grasp is because it is so close and it is so obvious that we miss it. And the other problem is that we will never experience the self as an object of perception. It's not going to be like how I see the glass or how I see the TV or how I see the wall. I'm never going to see the self like that because it is the light itself that illumines the TV and the wall and the glass. So our sort of way of learning cannot, our regular way of learning that we use for things cannot be used for the self. It is by the self that everything happens. Everything is illumined. Cool. Any other thoughts?
Nita, are you going to talk more about the ego? I mean, I get the part of the mind aspect, but that one's still kind of,
yes.
how do they combine into intellect?
Yeah, we are going to, like, I think that's exactly, you are right on track. That's the next verse.
All right, well, thanks.
Okay, let's do the next verse. Verse 7. Chaya hankaro rekyam taptaya pindavanmatam tadhankara tadatmya dehaschetana tamagat. So in the opinion of the wise, the identity of the reflection of consciousness and of ego is like the identity of the fire and the heated iron ball. The body having been identified with the ego, which has already identified itself with the reflection of consciousness, passes for a conscious entity. Okay, so here we are introduced to this word called chaya, which essentially means reflection. In the modern, like, Hindi language, we also call it like shadow. And so the mind or the ego is like the shadow self. It is not the real self. It is the shadow of the self. And because the shadow moves, we consider the shadow to be the self. And the way we think of ego and the intellect and the ego is, we start with the fact that I am, right? Because of this, because the self is luminous, it is self-lumining, it's consciousness, we have this experience that I am, right? That's true for everybody. Everybody can say, I am, I exist, right? Nobody has the doubt that they don't exist. So I am is the fact of our experience, that I am alive right now and I am. Then what happens is the mind looks at the world, sees a bunch of things, which includes my physical body, which includes my mental thoughts, right? These are all objects of perception. And then it says, I am dash, because it has this identification. So there is this sort of identity factor that comes in. So I am a human being because I look at this body and I'm like, oh, this is a body of a human being. So I am, fill in the blank. That is the way the ego works all the time. So if I look at, let's say, a person who is similar looking like me, I can be like, oh, I am an Indian, or I am an American, I am a British citizen, whatever, right? Like I am an African. All of these things are essentially objects of perception mixed with the ego, which is I am. Because the ego is sort of the tool that we use to make sense of the world, we mix it up with our identity. And not just from the physical world, even with the subtle world of our thoughts and feelings. So if I am talking about like my mind, I can say I am smart, I am stupid, I am, I am dumb, I am, creative, I am not creative. And we get this identity can warp into different dimensions and different complexities. I can say I am lovable, I am not lovable, I am miserable, I am happy. These are all images that are being illumined by the self. Maybe I'm having a thought that I am unhappy right now. But that what we do is the ego identifies with this thought and says, I am this. And that's where our identity becomes, becomes all the different things. So you can say, I'm a woman, I'm a man, I am tall, I am short. These are all sort of identities of the physical, right? But then you can have all these subtle identities of the mind and the personality. Like I am charismatic, I'm not charismatic, I'm funny, I'm not funny. all these different things that is being sort of revealed, right? Like you can, in this moment, you can say a joke and nobody laughs, and you can say, oh, I am a miserable person and I can never be funny. That can be a thought that comes up, right? But what happens is the ego identifies with the thought and makes an assumption and says, I am not funny. But if the mind if you can clearly see that these are thoughts that are coming up, there's no need to identify with them. They're just passing thoughts. The problem is we have never sort of analyzed them to actually see that these are just passing thoughts and opinions. And when we take opinions to be true and we keep repeating them and we keep repeating them, if I keep telling myself I am funny, I am not funny, I am smart, I am stupid, these things become sort of internalized because the thought has become deep rooted and has taken hold, and it has become part of our sort of identity, you can say. So if you look at your own thoughts, what are some things that you identify with? And what are some things that you get triggered by? Those are thoughts that you have taken seriously. And those are thoughts which the ego has sort of identified with and created this identity for yourself. Does that make sense? Steve, that was a question about ego. So this is how the ego works.
Yeah, that makes sense. Last time we talked about memory, and I can see that tying together. I guess I'm still have to process it a little bit more, just in terms of how my ego got to be the way it is, or how yours is different, or and maybe it's just randomness of life, but yeah, the idea of fire versus a hot iron ball not being the same thing helps tremendously, and the word identification helps me a lot. It would be easier to list the things I'm not identified with than than to go the other way.
Right. So I guess we didn't go into the actual analogy here. So fire is the only thing that is hot, right? And any object that comes in contact with this fire takes on the property of the fire. So, in this case, if you have a hot iron ball, or rather a cold iron ball to begin with, and you move it into the fire, after some time, the ball is going to start glowing just like the color of the fire. And then you can look at the ball and you can be like, oh, wow, that's a heated fire, hot iron ball. The property of the ball is to be hot. But actually what has happened, it has borrowed the sort of heat from the fire, and it appears to glow. It has no ability to glow by itself. And here we are given this, I guess, indirectly given this word we use called jada, which means inert. So things in the physical are inert. It is only with the light of consciousness that they appear to have life in them. So your thought, for example, you may think this thought is super alive. The thought that I am a powerful human being and I am extremely intelligent is a very powerful thought and a vivid thought that you can have. But it is only an experience for you because of this light of consciousness. If there was no consciousness in you, there would be no thought. All thoughts that are illumined in your experience are because of this light of consciousness. There is no thought that exists that is not in this light of consciousness. So there's no privacy, you can say, in some ways. No place where you are by yourself. There is always this light of consciousness illumining all the deepest, darkest secrets in your mind. And everything else in this world which is physical, which is the thoughts, the physical objects, they are all inert. They have no life. It is the life of consciousness that seems to give things life, just like how the light and the fire of the fire gives heat to the iron ball. Without this fire, there would be no heat in the iron ball. So that's the analogy here. Any thoughts about this? Yes, Dharam. You are muted.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I would like to add another analogy, like a consciousness, and I am is a portal for the prisoner. So whenever the consciousness get the birth, then it will get a barrack number and many numbers name. So it's like a, when we return back to the I am portal, then we will get the free from that jail.
Right. So the I am is a doorway, you can say, to the divine, because our experience that I am is happening all the time. There's no point when you don't have that experience that I am. And from I am, we want to get to the I. So, I am is the sort of, like you said, it's a portal, it's a doorway. And if we are not careful, I am fill in the blank takes place. And we start getting identified with what we see. So instead of looking at the world outside, which is I am which is trying to fill in the blank, we start to look inwards and we go to the I. So it's kind of like, if there's 3 words, I am whatever identity, man, woman, intelligent, stupid, whatever the identity you're looking at, instead of focusing on the outside, we will do this introspective looking of like, who is this I that is actually looking? And we get to the I. And so that is the process of getting to that I. Okay. Should we move on to the next verse? All right. Ahankarasya tadatmayam chichaya deha sakshibhihi sahajam karmajam bhrandincham chatrividham kramat. So the identification of the ego with the reflection of consciousness, the body, and the witness are of 3 kinds, namely natural, due to past karma, and due to ignorance, respectively. Okay, so now we are getting into like, why am I like this? Like, why does consciousness have this? If consciousness is one, like, why does it fork? And why does it like, why do I have this experience that I'm not consciousness and I'm all these other things? Like, why? That's a fact, where I feel like I am my body. I feel that I am my mind. I feel that I'm my personality. So here we are sort of given like 3 reasons. There's like, in yoga, you'll always find these lists of things. There's like 3 of this, 7 of that. And it tries to like organize it into some sections, I guess, because Indian people like lists. It's just like in our culture to have a bunch of lists all the time. So this is 3. We have 3 reasons. And what are those 3 reasons? Natural, due to some past actions that we have done. And the third is due to ignorance. So why do I identify with the body? Even though it is a reflection of consciousness, as you're saying, and even the witness, you can say. So even the thought about the self is not the self. So, the thought that I am the thought, even that is not the self. So we can have an opinion about the self. We can say it is like this, it is like that. Those are all thoughts. They are also not the self. The self is without thought, without any sort of property. It is just on. And you cannot say anything about it, actually. You can, we are trying to study about the self, but the self is untalkaboutable, which is sort of the contradiction. Everything is like very contradictory, but all we can try to do is we can try to point. We can try to point to what the self is, where it is. It's trying to find the moon in the sky. You know how sometimes there's this crescent moon and you're like, oh, can you see the beautiful moon? And then you're like, no, I can't really see the moon. And then you have to point and say, okay, do you see the tree in the distance? And you can say, yes, I can see the tree in the distance. Then you can say, can you see the branch which is slightly protruding, which is, without any leaves on the right side of the tree? And then like, oh yeah, I can see that branch. Right behind the branch is the moon. And you're like, oh yeah, now I see the moon. Great. But what you have done is you have used things as a pointer to get to some place. And in the same way, we are using facts in our experience to point and move our attention from one place to another. And we are moving it from the external and we are moving it to the internal. And along the way, our mind is always doubting. So we need to answer some questions. Things like, what is ignorance? Like, why does this happen? All of these are like reasons for the mind to quieten down, because otherwise the mind will never believe that this is actually true. So here we are trying to actually answer the question of like, why is the ego like this? Why does it not believe that it's the self? Why do I have this confusion? And it's because of 3 reasons: natural, past karma, and due to ignorance. I think we will get into each of these in the next few verses. So maybe this is actually a good place to stop. And we will get into like these reasons in the next class. But it's acknowledging the fact that this is not true for everybody, right? Like we all have experience that I am the body, I am identified with the ego, I am identified with my personality, with my subtle body. That is a fact. And now we're going to get into why that is true, why that's happening in the next class. So stay tuned for episode 3 of Drig Drsya Viveka. Any thoughts about this, of what we have done so far?
Hi, Puneeth.
Hi, Simi.
Hi, thank you again for doing this. This is more, I just wanted to share something. Maybe others have also experienced maybe like a similar journey, or maybe not. But verse 5, like it was, for me personally, like it really clarified a lot of the questions I had. So I think I've shared this with you. I grew up Christian. So we have the concept of soul, right, in Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
And then I sort of, because of some things I went through, I sort of got into Buddhism. And Buddhism is where I kind of learned about, you are not this, you're not this. So who are you? And when I practiced that, I always came across this, like it was an experience of like, no me, like I guess in Buddhism, it's called no self.
Anatman, I think is the word, right? They use?
What's that?
The word they use is anatman. Is that
right? It's anatman, yes, no self, and the concept of emptiness, which is it's very interesting. But anyway, so I there's that no self understanding, and I've done meditations where what I've experienced is it's a sense of oneness, right? But I got into yoga, and this is when I realized, and then I started hearing the word Atman, the word I, and I recognized that I was getting caught up in the word so much that I was no longer. And then when I spoke to you, you had me do the who am I inquiry, like the meditation, and I kept getting stuck in the I, the Atman, and all of that, because for like so many years I've identified the I, the just that letter I as Simi, that it was so hard to detach and to even like ask myself, who am I? That word I got stuck in, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
But this right here clarified so much for me that, when I was doing that, who am I was trying to feel the I, trying to feel the consciousness, trying to feel, there was that block. And that was my first question last week. Can you observe the observer? Because I was getting stuck, and right here it's saying, I'm sorry, it was in verse 5. It was the next one or the first one where it says it's unity. Yes. Yeah, where it says consciousness is unity. And that's when it hit me so hard, where it was blocking for me when I was doing the who am I, because that word Atman, I would go into this understanding of the soul again. The word I would get stuck there. Now I'm starting to see the how the emptiness and consciousness, it's all if I can let go of the words, I feel like I might be on the right path,
Yes. The words are only pointers. In the end, you have to let go even of the words, because we are settling into an experience which is always happening in the now, in the now, in the now. And you're just using the words as a way to move our attention. And once the attention is there, drop the word, because the word is another thought and another thought. And, I think I like the way you framed it, which is like the effort of wanting to get there, that itself becomes a block. We want to make efforts in the beginning to go from like all of the external attention that we give to the world to this inner attention. That's the effort, because the mind is always outwardly focused. So we use effort in the beginning to say, okay, let me focus on the I. Let me focus on the I. And we use that to get out of the external to get to this place, which is the I, the word itself. But once you're there, it's not the word, it is the feeling and the presence, which is what we are turning to. And this presence or this feeling, we have to use a word to describe it, which unfortunately we say I or Atman or Anatman, but that's the feeling. And always it's coming to that place. We don't want to be caught up in our head in a tool or in a process. We use the tool to eventually drop the tool. So I love the way the framing of what we're doing is we're lighting a fire, and we use like a stick to move the fire, get it in a place, but finally the stick itself has to be thrown into the fire. And the stick is the tool, or the words, or the scriptures. All of this, in the end, is a tool. It is not the end. We use the scriptures, we use the practice to get to that place. So thank you for sharing, Simi. That was beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
I have a question on the last verse that we did. Number 8, I think. Yeah. So what does reflection of consciousness mean here? That is one question.
Yeah.
And the other question is, does this verse, does it translate to the identification of ego with the reflection of consciousness is natural? The identification of ego with body is due to past karma. The identification of ego with witness is due to ignorance. Is that how it translates to?
Is past life, you said?
No. Past karma.
Yeah. What about it?
No, I was clarifying. Does this line translate into the identification of ego with the reflection of consciousness is natural?
Yeah.
The identification of ego with body is due to past karma. The
I see what you
identification of
mean.
ego with witness is due to ignorance. Is that how it translates to? Is that how it?
I see. You're saying if there's a mapping to like each sentence, to the actual cause.
I can tell the reason behind the question, because I was thinking the purpose of this course is partly to get to the witness. And if I do the mapping, it translates to ignorance.
No, I don't think that's, So I think that you are identified with these 3 different places. And there's 3 reasons for ignorance itself. Like, I don't think they're like in the order. They're just like, there are three kinds of identifications. You can be identified with the reflection of consciousness, which is a physical world, including your inner thoughts, right? And then there's like a identification with the body, which is actually the root cause of one of the hardest blocks to get to liberation, which is the body. And finally, the witness itself. You can be identified with the witness as like the thought, like Simi was saying, like a thought that I am a witness is also a bondage. And ideally, we want to get even past that.
So we want to get to I am the witness without the thought.
Yeah, we get to a place that I am the witness, but that itself is a thought. The fact that you are a witness is a fact. It's not even, you don't need to keep repeating that, right? Like if I tell you that if you believe that you're a cow, let's say, for whatever reasons, that's your ignorance. And then I show you a mirror and I'm like, see, you are not a cow, you are a human being, right? Like you're like, oh, wow, I'm a human being, I'm not a cow. Now you don't need to keep carrying that mirror everywhere to keep reminding yourself that you're a human being. You have seen yourself and you're like, now my knowledge is I'm a human being, done, boom. So you don't have to keep reminding yourself and keep affirming that I am the witness, I am the witness, I am the witness, or I am the human, I'm a human. That is now your knowledge. Similarly, once you see that you are the self, not see by like reading or thinking about it, but directly experiencing it, that becomes your knowledge. And after that point, even the fact that you're a witness, you're not a witness, doesn't matter. These are just words. So that's the sort of end goal that we want to get to. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
And then we'll get into like the reasons. I just didn't want to go into this today
Okay.
because it's, I want to do a meditation. It'll just take a long time to get through this. We'll get through this in the next class. So we can maybe repeat this verse in the next class, if that helps. Okay, so we have 15 minutes. Let's do a meditation. All right, let's get to a comfortable seat. So if you're sitting down or if you were lying down, I would recommend sitting with your back, neck, and head aligned. Make sure you're gently resting your head on your shoulders. And just start by taking a few deep breaths. Conscious breaths. Just breathing in life, energy, and you're breathing out tiredness, laziness. Just gently scan your body to see if you're feeling any sort of discomfort or your strain. And continue breathing deeply. On the exhale, just let go of that discomfort and strain. We will continue our practice of subject-object discrimination. So I want you to notice that there's always this witness or this subject or this awareness that's illuminating objects for us. So our breath, maybe you can hear some sounds around you. Maybe you can hear the traffic. Maybe you can hear the fan in your room. Anything that is being illumined by the self, by this awareness. We don't want to get caught up with the word, but we want to look into this fact of this experience that's happening now. It's happening now, now, now. Any moment you can get to this place and see that, yes, there is this experience being illumined. So you can start with the breath and see that the breath is Maybe you're breathing shallow, maybe it's long, deep breaths. But I am able to see this breath. The self is illumining this breath. We move to the realm of maybe the feelings that you're feeling right now. Maybe you're feeling joyful. Maybe you're feeling meh. Maybe you're feeling happy. Maybe you're feeling indifferent. But just like how you were able to see the breath, can you not see the feelings in the same way? Something is revealing this feeling. Now we can move our attention to something even subtler, to the realm of thoughts. If you can see that your mind is thinking about what to do today, what are your plans for this weekend? Maybe you have a project that you have to finish. Mind is illumining. The self is illumining the mind and all of its thoughts. Just like how the self was illumining the breath, illumining the sounds. Now see if you can notice the gap between when one thought ends and another thought begins, the space between the thoughts. Can you now see the space between the thoughts, just like how you see the thoughts itself? As you observe the space between the thoughts, see if you can notice this vast space and sky of awareness in which all of these thoughts, feelings are revealed to you. Call this Akash, the sky, which is illumined. Feels like empty space. This is yourself. And in these quiet moments, when the mind is quiet, the self is revealed more. You can get direct taste of what the self is. When the mind is active and engaged and busy, it's hard to even notice that this place is available to us. But we didn't create this. We didn't have to make an effort. All we did is we just paid attention to something that's always happening. And this awareness, see if you can notice that it never rises. It's never that you are more aware at one point, you're less aware in the next. It's a constant state of awareness. What may be in this awareness may be different moment to moment. But this awareness is still, you can say. Doesn't rise, doesn't set, doesn't change. Because it doesn't change, you can say it's timeless, it's beyond time. Doesn't come into being, doesn't die. It's birthless, it's deathless. You didn't do anything to create it. It's always been there, and it'll always be there. So keep checking it out. Keep coming back to this place and see if this is true. slowly, very slowly, bring your attention back to objective reality. When you're ready, you may open your eyes. So we're going to end our class with a chant, and you can feel free to join, or you can just listen. Yogarato va bhogarato va Yogarato va bhogarato va Sangarato va sangavihina Sangarato va sangavihina Yasya brahmani ramate chetam Yasya brahmani ramate chetam Nandeti nandeti nandatyeva Nandeti nandeti nandatyeva Nandeti nandeti nandatyeva. And the English translation is, I love this verse because it kind of talks about the entire purpose of this work, which is, if you let one revel in yoga or let one revel in bhoga, which means, bhoga means to indulge in material pursuits. So it's acknowledging that there's both sorts of lifestyles that we can have. Let one seek enjoyment in company, or let one seek enjoyment in solitude. She whose mind revels in the self, she enjoys, indeed only she enjoys. Which means that once we can learn that this pleasure that exists in this world is within us, and once we can access that, then no matter the external situation, we can enjoy wherever we are. And that's a great place to be. And I hope all of us can get to that point, and get to realize the self for ourselves. Cool. Thank you all for joining this Saturday morning. And, you probably have better things to do in life, but appreciate you coming and spending time with all of us. So thank you.
Thank you, Puneet.